Senator Lindsey Graham is flying into a combat zone. He meets with Zelensky, announces a new sanctions package against Russia, and literally a day later, his heart stops with no details about the cause. They don't tell us what the senator died from, which only heightens the morbid curiosity. Graham's death is objectively beneficial both to Ukraine's opponents and, as claimed by the same voices in the Democratic Party, which is losing one of the most difficult Republicans to deal with who knew how to negotiate across party lines. His citizens, the last great hawk on Capitol Hill. In a year and a half, Graham went from being Zelensky's fiercest critic to probably his most steadfast and influential defender in the Senate. Graham's views were openly militant. For years, he talked about the need to bomb, to win, to use force, Iran, Russia, any opponent of America. What kind of figure is he? What does his departure mean for Ukraine, for America, for the Republican Party? What does his departure mean for Trump, after all? Let's figure all this out. On the evening of June 11 in Washington, the heart of a man whom all of America knew stopped beating. All of America, Lindsey Graham. Well, young, still only 71 years old by today's standards, that's really young. He died a day after returning from Kyiv, a city he had flown to, I think, for the 10th time since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And that's when a wave started building on social media and Telegram channels. Talk, talk, talk. People who are prone to conspiratorial thinking. They say it's too convenient a comparison and too coincidental. And whether it's a coincidence or not, gentlemen, it's really up to you to decide. There are no official confirmations or explanations, and from here on in this video, I will only talk about facts. So please draw your own conclusions, as they say. And the fact is that this person's journey itself is, well, an absolutely cinematic story, as they say. Especially if you remember. If you remember just a year and a half ago, after Zelensky's failed visit to the White House, the senator was the biggest critic of the president of Ukraine. And then suddenly, as they say, he did an about-face, meaning he turned 180 degrees. The official statement from Graham's office was brief. A sudden and unexpected illness. According to NBC, emergency services responded to a call about a heart attack. By emergency services, I mean like an ambulance, not urgent care. I don't know exactly what rushed to him. The Senate probably has its own service, right? There are no more details, and apparently there won't be any. The family, as we were told, asked to respect their right to privacy. What does it mean that the family asked to respect their right to privacy? I've never seen anything like that in my life when it comes to a person of Lindsey Graham's stature. Is saying what he died of a sign of respect, or is keeping it private a sign of respect for his privacy? Right away, the idea comes to mind like maybe he died of AIDS or some kind of venereal disease like syphilis. But it seemed like there were no signs of that. Or we're talking about the suspicion that he was poisoned. In any case, a person who spent decades in Congress and then in the Senate, who was entirely a public figure, in my view, doesn't have any right to a private life in this sense. Well, all right, let's move on. Of course, he has the right, but not when it comes to the cause of death. The history of the political evolution of the GRM regarding Ukraine. The plot in itself is worthy, as I already said, of being a separate movie. In February 2025, after the absolutely disastrous meeting between Zelensky and Trump in the Oval Office, you know, the one that went around the whole world with footage of their mutual accusations, let's call it that, yes. It was exactly GRM who turned out to be one of the harshest critics of the Ukrainian president. He publicly doubted whether it was even possible to do business with this man again, meaning Zelensky. A year and a half has passed. And by July 1926, GRM had become one of the most convinced, it seems, and active, well, convinced, I'm not sure, but at least active, supporters of Ukraine in the Republican Party. He flew to Ukraine, stood there, I remember the photos, on tank training grounds, visited the Skyfall drone factory there, I think, right? He personally worked out with the White House the formula for a new package of sanctions against Russia. Oh, right, that happened before his flight to Ukraine, his last public appearance before his death. He announced that a group of senators, bipartisan at that, had reached an agreement with the administration on a new sanctions package, and he even said these words, "We have a formula to end this war," meaning these are sanctions so harsh that, well, directly, yes, or maybe not. What exactly changed his position over these 1.5 years? Well, I don't have an answer. Maybe someone knows, but I haven't read or seen it anywhere. Any explanations remain interpretations, not confirmed facts. But the trajectory is telling in itself, from a harsh critic to the main lobbyist for Ukrainian interests in Congress, even though he remained a Trump loyalist until the end. And he interacted well with Trump. They had, how should I put it, well, I don't know, maybe friendly or almost friendly relations. In general, it's all insanely strange. It's not that I have any ideas about it, it's just strange, that's all. Graham's views were, well, frankly, quite militant. Yeah, that's just how I remember him. By the way, that's exactly why some voters loved him, because he never hid his beliefs, never adjusted his rhetoric to the current situation. He was always like, let's go, bomb them. But that's the paradox of Graham. He's a harsh hawk, but at the same time, he was one of the most respected people in the Senate among, as they say, the other side of the aisle, among Democrats. The reason is actually simple. They saw in him a person who acts out of conviction, not out of party discipline. Well, of course, some things were done there at some point and so on, yes, but mostly he acted out of his own convictions. You could call him, work things out, find compromises. He usually kept his word so much that his colleagues, so to speak, even started to get on his case about it. That's exactly why, over the decades of his Senate career, he had dozens of bills to his name that were co-written with Democratic senators. The symbol of this ability to bring together people from different camps is the famous friendship of the Three Musketeers, namely John McCain, Joe Lieberman, and Graham himself. One was a Republican, another a Democrat, later an independent in Lieberman's case, and then another Republican. But when it came to foreign policy, they acted, I don't know, like a single, almost unified team. They traveled together to conflict zones, together advocated for a tough stance against authoritarian regimes. There's a historical episode worth remembering here. When McCain was running for president in 2008, the Republican Party considered the option of choosing Lieberman, a Democrat, as vice president. I don't remember anything like that in the last 100 years. Someone completely breaking with their party over support for the Iraq War. If that had happened and McCain had won, then the trio of McCain, Lieberman, and Graham could very well have ended up leading American foreign policy for years. Most likely, Graham would have been Secretary of State, I imagine, but history turned out differently. In the end, McCain chose an unexpected candidate, Sarah Palin. Some new blood, and still lost the election to Obama. Yeah, he lost. But the very fact that an inter-party tandem was considered shows just how atypical this group of people was for modern polarized America. Now here's another very important point, a seat in the Senate. Why does a seat in the Senate have special significance right now? A senator has died. Graham's death is not just the loss of an individual, it's a concrete shift in the balance of power. Before his death, the Republican Party held 53 seats in the Senate, compared to 45 for the Democrats. And 2 independents, who actually vote with the Democrats, so basically it's 53 to 47, right? Now it's 52 to 47. Every seat in the current Senate matters. Because with such a narrow gap between the two parties, regardless of the 2 independents, And the fate of bills very often depends literally on one or two votes. According to the laws of the state he lived in and was elected from, that's South Carolina. The temporary replacement before the election is appointed by the governor, and he's a Republican. Henry McMaster, who was actually the co-chairman of Graham's election campaign at one time, is not running for another term as governor. The situation is complicated by the fact that Graham has already been announced as the official Republican candidate for the November election against Democrat Annie Andrews. Now the party will have to urgently hold special primaries. The application period may open as early as July 21st. I think they announced that on the 21st they will urgently open it. So the special election itself will take place somewhere around August 10th or 11th. The winner of the primaries will go to the November elections, to replace Graham. For the Republicans, this is a serious stress test, like South Carolina, a red state. There, Trump got 58 votes, and in theory, any Republican should win. Well, as they say, almost automatically. But almost automatic is not the same as guaranteed. Especially when you have to promote a new candidate in just a few weeks, someone the voters don't yet know as a person who truly represents their interests. And not just a name on the ballot, this means urgent mobilization, money for advertising, recognition, party discipline, everything that the incumbent senator has built up over the years, but the new candidate doesn't have any of that at all. Among the discussed candidates for the interim appointment and the primaries, the names of Lieutenant Governor Pamela Yvette and Congressman Joe Wilson are already being mentioned. He is the state's senior Republican, and his son, Alan Wilson, by the way, is currently running for governor of the state. Graham's departure is not just the loss of a vote for aid to Ukraine, but the loss of a rare political type. A person capable of remaining a committed hawk while also building bridges across party lines. In an era when compromise in Washington has almost become a dirty word, we hope that they would all behave that way, trying to find compromise, but nothing of the sort happened. Compromise is out of the question. The moment you mention compromise, it means you have to talk to your colleague. They don't give money for elections. In this era, well, this is the cream. Graham was, in my opinion, one of the figures who didn't let Congress turn into two irreconcilable camps. But the U.S. political system is set up in such a way that even the most serious loss doesn't create a vacuum. Not for long, at least. The replacement mechanism has been set in motion. The governor takes action. The Democratic Party, therefore, mobilizes to fight against whoever it ends up being, and accordingly, the Republican Party fights for the one they nominate. In a few weeks, the voter of South Carolina will have the right to choose the one who will best represent their interests in the Senate. The institutions are functioning. And this is probably the best legacy that can be left by a person who has believed all his life in the power of democracy, American democracy, or a republic with democratic governance. Not what is called, so to speak, democracy in the Greek sense, yes. And it is capable of defending freedom, both in its own country and far beyond its borders. Although usually he wanted to defend by flying and bombing. There you go. By the way, including in Kyiv, which he continued to support until the last day of his life. Ladies and gentlemen, with this we conclude our special episode. And until we meet again.